Okay. Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to SerenityOS office hours. Let's see if things are working. Okay. Getting some reactions. Great. So I had some trouble here. I installed Ubuntu updates since last time I streamed, and everything was broken. So I had to reinstall OBS and a bunch of other stuff and reconfigure my camera. So hopefully it's working okay. So it sounds like at least you can hear me and see me. So that's excellent. All right. Good to have so many people already here. I have been out for a while, but obviously now I'm back. And in case anybody missed it, I posted about this thing yesterday. That we have been working on a new programming language. So if you haven't read this post already, then I would definitely recommend checking that out. I'm just gonna drop it in the chat. Oops, that's not that. So that people are caught up. And then let's look at who's here. Hello, Jaja. Hello, person who does not program in CPP. Valtteri, network exception. Amy P with the golden yak. Lots of people here. Very nice to see you all. So let's find the first question from Jaja here. Starting off with a noob question. If Jakt is memory safe and transpiles to C++, couldn't you then just write memory safe C++ code directly? Okay, so that's a fine question. So basically, the issue with C++ is that it allows you to make dumb mistakes. And no matter what you do, as long as you're using C++, you will always have the power to make mistakes because the language allows you. So the idea with a new language is that we make it restricted so that you can't actually express the mistakes that you might normally make in C++. And so even though we're compiling or transpiling Jakt to C++, the restricted nature of Jakt makes it so that you can't express the typical C++ mistakes. And of course, there is still a way to screw yourself in Jakt if you need to. We have unsafe blocks, just like Rust has, but most of the code will just be safe by default, and then it will be very clear due to the unsafe markers in the code where unsafe things are happening. Let's see, Sam says, it's working. The Ubuntu update broke a lot of things for me too. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing every time I update Ubuntu. There's always a bunch of breakage, so I usually wait a month or so after they release a new version, but even so. But now we're back up and running. Vishnu is asking, was the language your secret project? Yes. Yes, it was. That's exactly what it was. Hey, Kenneth, how's it going? Let's see. Jessica says, I noticed on the list of planned features that defer is mentioned. Isn't that just poor man's RAII? Well, so defer is already supported. And the reason I added defer to Jakt is because we actually do something just like it in Serenity all the time. We have this thing called scope guard, which is used in tons of places. And the way that we use it is just to create some kind of a little closure that will execute when we exit the current scope. So it's a pattern that's like all over our code base. And if you compare this RAII, the thing is, you don't really want to declare like a new struct, give it a destructor and so on for every single time that you just want to do something on scope exit. So for that reason, I thought having a defer keyword, since we're using the pattern all the time anyway, makes a lot of sense. So instead of this, you would simply write defer unlink db name, and yeah, and you're done. So it's just a little bit of syntactic sugar just to make a common pattern that much nicer. Hey Linus, how's it going? Cured meat, that's a name. Let's see. Paulo says, can you comment on the reasons why Rust was not fit for the task? So Rust was one of many languages that was evaluated, and the main reason that I did not end up wanting to use Rust was that it was simply not good at modeling object-oriented programs. And Serenity is primarily object-oriented GUI programs, like if you look at what the system consists of. And that's just not one of Rust's strengths. Like it's great at many things, but expressing GUI programs is not one of them. So we wanted something that was more suited to that task, since it's the majority of what we do. Let's see. Someone somewhere in those 7 billion people says, "Hello, Andreas. I tried creating your language recently as well, making a compiler in C++, but I struggle a bit on the AST. Would you have any tips for building ASTs in C++? I don't know. I mean, the first time I really built an AST was when I started building the JavaScript engine in Serenity. So that's actually captured on video. Let's build a JavaScript engine for SerenityOS. As I recall, that started out with, I'll just link to that here. Starting lib.js. And it's like any other C++ tree structure, I think, that you have, you make some kind of a node type, and then you give the nodes abilities to point at each other and somehow keep the whole tree alive. But I don't have any special tips for ASTs. I guess I haven't done enough language stuff. Like, this is my second time I'm implementing a language, and the first time it was just JavaScript, which had like a blueprint for everything. But I should say that I did not start the Jakt language all by myself, right? I had a ton of help from JT, who did like more work than me on the bootstrap. So big credit to JT, of course. At one point, I said to them that I felt like I was kind of decorating while they were building a house, but it got a little bit better as I got more comfortable with writing the compiler and writing Rust for the compiler. Let's see. German WTB says, "Have you already taken a look at the dynamic layout system PR? And if so, what are your thoughts?" I have not looked at the code for that. I've only looked at some video. I thought the video looked kind of neat, but I have no idea what the code is like, so I need to actually get into that. Samuel says, "Is Jakt in a demonstrable state yet? Demonstrable state yet?" Sure. Yeah, I guess. Let me make you a quick demo here. So, I mean, we already have tons of little samples in the code base, but by the way, I'm using VS Code right now just to learn it, and because people made a syntax highlighter for Jakt for VS Code, which is super neato. So let me just make a test program for Samuel. All right, Sam. So every program has a main function, and we have a simple println for printing a line. Hello, Sam is Samuel. And this is as simple as it gets. So you'll notice we don't have any semicolons required, and reminds me a little bit of JavaScript in a way, I guess. So let's just compile this program. So the way you compile is you use cargo run to build and run the compiler, and then you give it an input, and then what it will spit out is a file called output.cbp, and that contains then a program that you can compile. Let's see if I can remember the entire command for compiling it. Close enough, and then we can run a.out, and it prints hello Samuel. So indeed, it is a two-step compiler at the moment that transpiles to C++, and I feel like somebody has an upcoming question about that, so we'll get to that in a moment. Obviously, the language can do a lot more stuff than this, but this is just how you would get started. I'm sure we'll have a chance to do more demos. Let's see. George858 says, are there GDB prototype printers for ACK-string vector, hashmap, and ACK-string-view? I'm pretty sure we have those. I have never used them myself, I think, but I know that somebody made them, so somebody can probably tell you what or where they are. Glenford Williams says, now that you have written enough Rust, what do you think about it? Well, I've only written about 10,000 lines or so still far from 100,000 lines, which means that I honestly don't really have an opinion about the language worth hearing. I'm forming an opinion myself, but I don't think that it's necessarily mature enough that people should have to listen to it. But I am actively working on a compiler written in Rust, so that probably tells you something about how I feel about it. Darius Dusentrieb says, what are some languages that influenced Jakt? So the big two influences are probably, or the big four influences are Swift, Rust, C++, and JavaScript on my part. Kind of taking the things that I like from each of those languages and bringing them together. And the design of the language is still like very open. A lot of things need to be figured out, but in the 2 weeks that we spent just bootstrapping it, I feel like we got it to a point where it has sort of a reasonable core that you can then expand on. So now it, of course, remains to be seen what the final product will look like. But I felt like it was a good time to open it up and, you know, tell people what we've been doing and I don't know, get back to developing in public again, I guess. I don't love developing privately or secretly. It's not that fun. But I felt in this case that it was kind of necessary just to avoid turning it into a huge bike shed discussion. So it is what it is, but I think it turned out okay. Let's see. Jessica says, I've been watching your older videos and I noticed that you had an entire naming change of your APIs. How hard was the refactoring? So we've gone through many big naming changes in Serenity, both like changing coding style and changing naming style. We changed class names. We added namespaces at one point. It used to be that everything had like a single letter prefix. So instead of GUI, the GUI namespace in libGUI, we used to have just classes prefixed with a G. So there was G button and G widget instead of GUI button and GUI widget. And all of those things were pretty painful, but I guess it was always one of those things where I really wanted to see if the code would look prettier on the other side of it, so I just kept pushing through it anyway, even though it took me hours and hours just to get everything right. But I guess I don't mind dumping a lot of time into something like that if you end up with, like in that case, what I wanted to get to was like the prettiest possible backtrace. I remember being very motivated by really good looking backtraces where you could see like, oh, this clearly belongs to this library because it has that namespace prefix. But yes, it wasn't technically difficult, but it was just took a very long time to do them because of all of the little details that you couldn't just regex. Hey Mustafa, how's it going? Mustafa says, soon you're not going to be able to say, I haven't written 10k lines in Rust and I have no opinion worth hearing. Aha, but you see my limit is 100k lines. So 10k lines, I have written 10k lines, or maybe a little bit more. But I still don't think you need to hear my opinion. Vishnu is asking, why transpile to C++? Serenity has LLVM? No, question mark. Right, so the big reason to transpile to C++ is that it makes interoperating with our huge existing C++ code base quite easy, actually. So a problem that all the other languages that I looked at, a problem they all had was that they couldn't call C++ directly, and it was non-trivial to call them from C++. I think in practice, what you ended up doing was that you would make sort of a C glue library that would sit in between. So you call like a C function, and then that thing knows how to talk to the other language. And that, I don't know, I didn't like the look of that. And transpiling to C++ means that as long as you have the right function signatures on both sides, they can call each other freely, which I think is super awesome. And it makes incremental adoption in something like Serenity much, much easier, because you can, I mean, if you think about it, you can essentially like replace one function in a class with a Jakt implementation without having to rewrite like the whole class or the whole file or even the whole library or application. Like you can substitute such tiny at such a tiny granularity with this approach. And I don't know, I was really impressed by the idea when JT suggested it. That was really what sold me on it. That the fact that like, wait a minute, if we transpile to C++, then we generate sort of interchangeable sources. And that's not to say that we would continue to transpile to C++ forever. It's just, I guess it's just a way to test if the language is good enough, is we build a prototype and then we test it out in this way. And, you know, if it turns out that we love it so much, then eventually we'll be standing there with the whole system written in Jakt, not a single line of C++, and then we can replace the transpiler with a native code generator instead. But there isn't really a need to do that right now. Like, in fact, making a native code generator would only introduce problems and reduce flexibility. So that's definitely something that will have to wait. Let's see. I don't program in CPP says, how do you track dirty rectangles in the Windows server / graphics driver? Where do you store them? Do you do any combining? So we absolutely combine dirty rectangles, and in Windows Server they are, I mean, actually I haven't looked at this for a while. Also, what? Okay, I'm forgetting what editor I'm in. Wait. My brain is glitching because I have this VS Code keybinds memorized suddenly, and now I can't get the little search thing to come up here. Okay, why does this not work? Okay. So I guess I'm just going to kill my C line and try to start a new one. Let's try that again. I still don't know if I was pressing the wrong thing or if I just, if something was wrong with it, but let's try that one more time. Okay, here we go. So in the Compositor in Windows Server, at least last time I worked on this, that's where we were accumulating rectangles and stuff, like dirty rects. Let's see. Yeah, so the Compositor screen data, which is one per screen. So if you have multiple screens, you'll have multiple of these data structures. But it has this thing called a disjoint rect set. And it has a bunch of them. So it has the different rects that need flushing. And we do combining, not just combining, but also splitting to try to make like the smallest set of sort of disjoint rectangles that we need to update on screen. And that's what the disjoint rectset class does. So it's sort of a set of rectangles. And if you add a rectangle to the set, if that rectangle overlaps with any of the rectangles already in the set, then it will split the rectangles in the set so that there's no overlap. And this is sort of our main mechanism for avoiding overdraw in the compositor. And then I think each window in the Windows server also has its own dirty rectangles that it tracks, which then eventually get flushed to the compositor. But it's been a while since I worked on this, so I don't know if my information is completely up to date. If you want to know specifics about the Windows Server compositing, the best thing to do is probably come to Discord and talk to Tom, I guess, who's worked on that more than I have recently. And some other people that I forget right now. Let's see. Valtteri says, will JT do Jakt hacking videos? Well, I will. I mean, I can't speak for JT, but I would love to see that myself. I will say that much. I think they probably feel I could imagine that they feel maybe a little bit like they want to do something else because we've been doing this nonstop for 2 weeks. But I think eventually, hopefully, we'll see. Let's see. Valtteri says, how will Jakt handle libraries/modules? Traditional includes or something fancier? So there isn't anything decided yet, but obviously we want to be able to have multiple source files for a program. At the moment, all programs have to be a single file, so that it is very limited in that way. But I think one of the big things that we've learned from scaling Serenity from 10 files to thousands of files is that rebuilds, especially big rebuilds, are freaking lame and awful, and nobody wants to sit through a 1600 file rebuild just because they touched one file if they can avoid that. So at least for me personally, that's sort of my main thing that I want out of an include system is to avoid that scenario as much as possible. So I will be looking for whatever approach like has the smallest rebuilds associated with it. And there are some ideas for that, but haven't actually prototyped anything yet, so we'll see. But I will say that like if there's something that we can do that maybe is a bit more verbose but ends up with way fewer and way smaller rebuilds, I think sacrificing some brevity for less rebuilding would be worth it. Vishnu says, does Jakt force declared variables to be initialized? Yes, all declared variables must be initialized. Yaiju says, function seems verbose. How about func and fun? So everything in Serenity is verbose. That's sort of our coding style. If you have looked at Serenity, then you would notice that we like to use full words like front bitmap instead of, I don't know, bump or whatever. Like it's not really our style. We like to write things out. Most people have reasonably large screens these days. It's rare that somebody has a lack of horizontal space. In fact, I think most people have more horizontal space than what they know what to do with. And saying function instead of func seems like one of those things that it just makes it read nicer, and everybody has autocomplete and everybody has horizontal spaced, so why not have the nice looking version instead of the arbitrarily truncated version? Let's see. Network exception says, is there a plan where the ACK code will end up ultimately? Will it ship with Jakt as the standard library, or will it remain part of Serenity? So I think you can guess what I'm going to say to this question. There isn't really a plan. I mean, I don't have plans, but in this specific case, I think what seems likely to me is that some types from ACK will transition to becoming Jakt native runtime types or whatever, and sort of migrate from ACK to Jakt. Like perhaps the string type, the vector type, sort of become language primitives and just move over there. But I think the majority of ACK will remain in Serenity. But we'll see how that whole thing works out. It's too early to tell, really. Let's see. Elton Correa says, and tests, question mark, thought of something. I'm not exactly sure what that means. If you're asking about Jakt, we have lots of tests. They just happen to be called samples for some reason. So our samples directory has unit tests for all kinds of little things, like dictionaries, for example. So you would have a dictionary. Oops, I'm not doing that right. So you have like a little Jakt program that counts the words in a piece of text, and then next to it you have a .out file that just contains whatever this program should print if it runs, and that is how we do the test. So you can very easily add a test. You just add a Jakt program, and then you add a file that contains what the program will output when it runs, and then you can run cargo test, which will run all of those programs. And it's pretty sluggish at the moment, actually, for the number of tests, and that is because we actually compile all of the runtime library into every single program instead of making it into a library. And that's just a silly hack that we did to get it running quickly. We can definitely make testing like virtually instantaneous if we turn the runtime into a static library or something like that instead. But yes, we definitely have tests, and more tests keep coming. Knut Bluetooth says, will Jakt have features to help with the browser? Well, of course. I mean, it's a language that is, we're designing it to specifically be good at the type of things we do in Serenity. And we do a lot of browser hacking in Serenity, so obviously the language has to be good at that. And not everything is figured out yet, but a lot of stuff like error handling and like tokenizing HTML, parsing HTML, stuff like that. I'm thinking ahead to those things and like making sure to include things that will make doing those tasks in the browser easier and harder to get wrong. But we'll see. Let's see. Valtteri says, so would it be accurate to say you do not have an opinion worth hearing about Jakt since you haven't written 100,000 lines of it? Exactly. That's exactly right. I don't really have an opinion. I just have, an open heart and a good feeling, but I don't really have a cerebral opinion about whether it's good or bad. It's something that we'll have to discover over time if this turns out good or not. And, if it turns out to not be good, then we'll change our strategy. When we feel like we can confidently say that, okay, this isn't actually good. But like with everything else in Serenity, like we have to be willing to take crazy chances, because if a project of this type if our project is not willing to take this crazy chances on something, then who else would? You know, like we are probably the most suitable project for trying something like this in the world. So let's see. Venkatesh says, "Hi Andreas, bro, how are you?" I am good, bro. How are you? Nice to see you in the chat. Let's see. Venkatesh says, "What is idiomatic code and semantics in code? What's the difference between them?" I'm not sure I understand this question. Banana Bunches says, "I see in the memory safety section of the FAQ you mentioned Jakt, but I'm guessing you've also considered Rust for Serenity as well. Why have you stuck with C++ after all the recent Rust development?" I'm not sure exactly how to interpret the question. Are you asking like why does the Serenity still use C++ even after I spent a few weeks using Rust? I guess the answer is because I didn't have time to rewrite all of Serenity in Rust, but I wrote parts of it in Rust, and some other people tried it out as well. But ultimately, it's just not the right language for Serenity, at least not the way the language is today. It's not a good fit for graphical applications, and that's really what Serenity is about. It's about building a graphical desktop system, and maybe Rust will become great at that someday. But at the moment, it was not clear to me how to do that in a pleasant way. Firefox 317 says, "Hello, wonderful Serenity people." Hello, wonderful Firefox 317. How's it going? Radiant Mango says, "As it lives under the SerenityOS organization, will it have the same high commit/coding standards as the Serenity pull request process?" Yeah, more or less, I guess. I think maybe a bit more relaxed in the beginning, since we are still bootstrapping, but at the same time, maybe in some ways it's more strict because we need to build out a huge library of unit tests for this thing. So whenever we're fixing bugs or adding new features, it's important that we add tests for them as well, so that we sort of grow a library of tests, because that's something that we really need. It will become very frustrating to try to use this language if it keeps regressing underneath us. So I feel a lot more strongly about the need for just tons of tests for this. So that's probably different, but at the same time, other aspects of like coding standards can be more relaxed. You know, like you don't have to look for the absolute best architecture and the best factoring for the compiler, for example. Like if you can make it do something in a decent way, it might be good to do it decently well now and then improve upon it later. Whereas with Serenity, we might look for the best architecture earlier. I don't know exactly. I mean, it's hard to answer these kind of hypothetical questions, but we'll see. Paulo says, "After a quick look at the samples folders of Jakt, wow, lots of cool features. Can you show a little more of it? Enums, matches, optional tuples, dict literals, you got it all." We definitely have a bunch of stuff, but not all of it. I can show you something that I worked on yesterday that I feel is pretty cool. So we have the ability to return errors. So what you can do is you can make a function that can throw an error. And this is not throwing in the sense of C++ exceptions or Java exceptions, but rather it's very similar to how error or works in Serenity. You know how we have this return type where you return something that's either an error or something else. And in Jakt, that is embedded into the language. So you can say that a function may throw, or it will return a 32-bit integer. And of course, in this case, it would just return the 32-bit integer. And then if we try to call this function here, and it actually throws, so it will throw an error. I don't know. This is my only way of making errors right now. Then this will generate code. Let me see if I can. Let me make a nicer command here so we can actually see the output as well. So it generates a function that has error or in the return type, and it automatically wraps calls to it in our own try macro from Serenity. So basically, this takes care of automatic propagation of errors. You don't have to do anything here if you don't want to. It will just propagate the error to your caller. And if you wanted to, so basically what happens here, let me actually run the program so that you can see what happens. I should probably, we should have a nicer way to, to compile these. So what will happen is you will get a runtime error. So basically this means that somebody threw a runtime error and it propagated outside of main. But if you want to actually catch the error here and maybe do something to handle it instead of just allowing it to propagate, you can use the try syntax. So you say try, and then you catch the error. And here you can then inspect the error. Got error, error.code, for example. And then we catch the error there instead. And this is based on the way that we actually tend to interact with error handling in Serenity. So there are two typical ways that we handle errors. Either you propagate it to your caller, or you handle it locally. So the syntax is still like open for improvements, obviously, but I feel like this is already so much clearer than what tends to happen in Serenity code, where you just have a lot of try spam. So you would have something like that that would propagate to your caller. And if you didn't want to propagate to the caller in Serenity, what you would do is something like this. And then error is result release error. And then, you would do this thing. So this is the Serenity style today, and this is sort of the cleaned up version of that. And I like it quite a bit. Of course, if you want to do bigger blocks where you might have many things that can throw errors, you can also do this. And any one of these fails or throws an error, then we will go here. Otherwise, we will just proceed through them. So it's similar to how other languages do exception handling or error handling, but not exactly like any language that I've seen, just similar. I just wanted something that modeled the same error handling patterns we actually use in Serenity. Anyway, let's see. Oh man, I am falling behind. Paul says, is someone looking at the debug side of Jakt, especially in relation to Profiler? Nope, not that I know of. Bernd says, hey Andreas. Hello Bernd, how's it going? Vishnu says, does Jakt force class constructors to initialize all member variables? Yes, at the moment. you have to initialize all variables. Amy P says, you mentioned liking clean stack traces. Do you think mixing in transpiled Jakt could muddy them in a way? That's definitely something that could happen if we end up with a lot of like little glue functions or trampoline code and stuff like that. But I think in my mind, it should be possible to have really clean backtraces even this way, because what we're generating is C++. So we control what the generated code looks like. And by doing that, we also control what the generated stack traces will look like. Hopefully you will be looking at fewer stack traces, of course, with this language, but you'll still see them. Mustafa says, I just want to say I very much appreciate no silly abbreviations in Jakt. Nice. Yeah. So I kind of like that. I like that you see the whole words. My editor does autocomplete. I'm sure your editor does autocomplete. It doesn't seem like something worth making a fuss about, like a couple of letters, because it looks nice to see the whole word. Bernd says, I have to say you made my day with the announcement of Jakt. I thought the side quest would be about a really neat feature or some kernel stuff, but this, just wow. Right. It's definitely a big side quest, and of course the big part of it is ahead of us. So now we just have the foundations and the start of something, but it's not anywhere near usable for anything serious. So lots of stuff to do, but I guess I wanted to open it up though, so that people can see what I'm doing, what we're doing, and they can join in and participate if they want to. It's nicer to do stuff in the open, definitely. Let's see, Bancas says, that early decision to write everything from scratch is going to be a big benefit in Jakt transition. That is definitely true. Oh, Tur Arne with a cute dog. Nice to see you here, Tur Arne. It's an old friend of mine from Norway. We used to work together. Cool. Let's see. Jessica says, I think I recall, but I'm not certain. But did you ever do an mmap trick for ring buffers that made it wrap around somehow? If so, how did that work? I don't know that I've done that. That sounds like something I've thought about, but never actually did. Maybe I said it out loud at some point, because I remember the thought of it, but I don't remember implementing it. I guess the idea would be that you would sort of set up the mappings so that when you run off the end of one page, you're sort of back at the start of your ring buffer somehow. I'm not exactly sure what the practicality of that is, but it's interesting concept. Kevin says, hi Andreas, I know that you've previously mentioned that being dogmatic about programming languages is silly and that they should be merely seen as tools. That said, I wonder what the future of C++ is. Yeah, I don't know what the future is of C++. I used to believe that C++ would, I guess I thought it would change faster and do more to, to work towards safety in the language. But it seems like in practice, it's not moving as fast as I thought it would. And C++ is not going to have memory safety anytime soon. So that's sort of why I changed my mind about it, I guess. But I was never married to C++. Like, I always thought of it as a tool. It just happened to be the tool that I knew best. And I think I was still riding on the wave of C++11, which was such a huge improvement that was, I don't know, fresh in my memory, at least, even though it's like more than 10 years ago at this point. But I still felt like we were riding the wave of C++11, like big changes, big improvements, and like, oh, what's going to happen next time in the next C++11? But it seems like it's not really going as fast as I imagined it would. So that's not to say that the C++ is a bad language or that it has something wrong with it. It's just that it's not gaining these features that I feel are necessary for longevity. So this is just taking matters into our own hands, I suppose. Let's see. Arthur says, Jakt, very cool. Where do you see it being used first in the SerenityOS codebase? Well, I don't know. It's definitely possible to convert like some of the smaller command line utilities. That's probably the obvious place to start, but the main thing that you need before that is arguments parsing. Like once we have some decent arguments parsing in the language, then it will be straightforward to convert a lot of the command line tools. But I don't know what's the best place to start. As I was saying earlier, though, one of the nice things about the architecture, the transpiler architecture, is that you don't necessarily have to replace an entire program, but you can instead replace a class here or a function there if you find something that's suitable for conversion, and then sort of gradually expand into the code base. Mati says, do you remember times when you have to use some apps like RAM Cleaner to clean not released by closed apps RAM in Windows XP and later? Does SerenityOS need that kind of app? So we don't need that type of thing, because when you close a process in SerenityOS, then all of the resources in use by that process are deallocated automatically. That is the case on all the contemporary Unix systems, as far as I know. Samuel says, is intentional that Jakt is AK with JT? I don't know, that looks like a coincidence to me. Let's see. John said that it's 16:30, workday is over. Congrats, welcome to the weekend. Josh says, will Jakt have some built-in concurrency functionality? So we have not begun looking at concurrency at all yet. So there isn't a strategy or anything like that. The language itself does not model ownership in such a way that makes it inherently thread safe. So we will require synchronization primitives, of course, like any language. And we've actually had some pretty good success in the kernel already with C++ and Serenity of finding these patterns that sort of create a resource that you can only access while holding a lock associated with that resource. And I think if we take those types of patterns, so we give you these sort of mutex scopes or spin lock scopes, and then you can only access resources while you're holding a lock on them. I think that will probably get us most of what we want, but it's just an area that we haven't even talked about yet because the language is so young that we're just bringing up basic features still. Omni says, your thoughts on Kaiser? Hold on while I Google Kaiser. I'm not sure exactly what I'm supposed to find. Kaiser computer? Programming? I don't know. You're gonna have to be more specific. I couldn't find it. Vishnu says, what does automatic reference counting mean? So automatic reference counting means that heap allocated objects in Jakt. So if I make a class myCoolClass, and then I go ahead and instantiate one of these. So cool is myCoolClass. This is a heap allocated object. So all class instances are heap allocated, and they are reference counted, which means that there is a number associated with this object. And whenever you store the object in a variable, then we add 1 to that little number. And when the variable disappears, we subtract 1 from the number. And when the number goes to 0, because there are no variables pointing at the object anymore, then we destroy the object because it's not used by anyone. And that is reference counting. And automatic just means that it happens without you having to say manually. Like if you were using, if you were writing C code on an Apple platform, I think you would have to do something like CF retain, cool, CF release, cool. You have to do these things manually whenever you are adding or subtracting from the reference count. But automatic reference counting means that that just happens automatically. And this is how Serenity works today already in the C++ for, I don't know, probably the majority of objects are using automatic reference counting. So really, we're just taking something that we do in C++ and making it transparent in the language here. So when you compile this, this actually becomes, in C++, becomes something like this. myCoolClass, public ref counted, myCoolClass. So we're just inserting the reference counting stuff for you so you don't have to think about it. And this means that if you were to have a function, do stuff, that takes a myCoolClass like this. So when you call that function, do stuff, cool, then cool here in this scope is a smart pointer that points to a myCoolClass, and that smart pointer is a non-null ref putter, so it will actually increment and decrement the ref count automatically. And the whole purpose of all this is so that you'll never have a dangling pointer, because anytime that you pass around a pointer, you're always incrementing or decrementing the ref count appropriately. So this is our solution to get rid of use after free bugs, basically. There are no raw pointers or raw references here in the language. Everything is smart pointers with reference counting. Hope that makes sense. Let's see. Baitink says, will Jakt live under the SerenityOS repo, or will it have a separate development cycle? Very likely it will have a separate development cycle. So it's in a separate repository here, still in the SerenityOS organization, but it's in a separate repo. And I mean, it's too early to say exactly how it will work, but I imagine that we will do something like releases of the compiler, and then Serenity will sort of use a specific release of the compiler, so that if you put something into Jakt that breaks something, then you don't automatically break Serenity right away, but we'll upgrade the dependency every now and then, instead of just like pulling from the default branch across the repositories. Let's see. Miles says, changed desktop environment. I didn't change it, but I upgraded my Ubuntu, so I made everything different. And I had to reinstall OBS as well, which is why things probably look and sound slightly different. Because I didn't have any of my OBS settings, so I had to hurry up and recreate them as best I could. Let's see. Lublu Google says, question to everyone. Do you find music useful for concentration? What genres do you like most? I know it's healthy to listen to different types of music, but which one is best for focusing? I suppose that's a question for everyone. For me personally, I like music that is instrumental, so music without lyrics. If I hear words, I just listen to the words and I can't think about what I'm trying to do instead. So for that reason, I find these instrumental electronic music mixes really helpful for programming. But I know many people like different things. Let's see. I am so far behind. Jeez. Okay, I'm just gonna have to catch up here. Real Zug says, hello world. Andreas, do you follow any other coders? If test, who, and have you hearing of Zoding? Not sure what you mean by if test, but yeah, sure. I have definitely heard of Zoding. I watch Zoding on Twitch every now and then, and he's got an amusing stream, I would say. It's enjoyable. And I follow a lot of different programmers, but I guess I do more programming myself than I watch other people program. So as I was saying about music, like I can't really handle having music with lyrics. I can't really handle like watching somebody program while I'm trying to program if they are talking while doing it. So I know a lot of people say that they enjoy like putting on programming videos and then doing stuff themselves, but I struggle with that. But if you are looking for other YouTube channels, for example, I have a couple of them on my YouTube. If you look in my channels, I think channels section, here are some channels that I follow. So check those out. Let's see. Dummy Killer 37 says, are we going to see future videos of you working on Jakt itself in the same spirit of you working on SerenityOS? Of course. Of course. Banka says, does this mean we might see you hacking on Rust in future videos? Well, I'm not going to be hacking on Rust, but I have to use Rust because the compiler for Jakt is currently written in Rust. So can't do anything about that. And a bunch of people asked, by the way, why we wrote the compiler in Rust, and that's just because JT was a lot more comfortable with Rust than C++, and I'm obviously a lot more comfortable with C++, but I felt like I could handle writing in Rust, so we went with that. And in a way, I like that we ended up writing it in Rust because it has provided a lot of opportunities to see features of a language that I don't see while writing C++, right? So it gives a lot of inspiration just to be using a language I'm not used to. Let's see. Mustafa says, is there any particular reason behind not having something like the question mark operator in Rust and automatically propagating errors? Personally, explicitly being able to see which line could fail seems nice. Right, so I keep thinking about this, and I'm still not sure what's good. But I tell you, the thing that I really like about the implicit try is, let's say we have a function that can throw some kind of error. Now, imagine that I want to do some stuff here. Like maybe I want to make myself a vector. Mutable. There we go. I want to have a vector of strings or an array of strings, and then I want to I want to add a bunch of strings to it. Push. Hello, Mustafa. All right. And then maybe I want to return this thing in the end. So let's say that we are returning an array of strings. So this code right here, as it is written, it's able to detect errors, allocation errors. So if we can't allocate this string, we will automatically throw an error. If we can't allocate space to push to the array, we will throw an error. And if you wanted to make all of these little operations, like even allocating a string, so that you have to like jam a question mark somewhere, it would become, I feel like, very strange, I suppose. Likewise, we can actually even do stuff like this. And this concatenation here can also propagate errors that occur. Like if you're trying to concatenate these strings and you can't allocate a buffer for the concatenation, implicit try allows that to still propagate. Whereas if you had to put a question mark, then what would you do? Like you would have to say, okay, this string construction first can fail, concatenation can fail, this string construction can fail. You know, you get the idea. Like that's sort of my problem with the question marks, is that if we use the question marks, then these nice patterns, they sort of become unusable. So of course, what we do in Serenity for stuff like this is that you would do something like a string builder, and then you would say like append hello, or actually you would even say try append, and then you would maybe try here. And I feel like there's just something about this whole thing. It's so verbose, the way that we've been living, and there's something so nice about this. I don't know. I just like how it shrinks down the code vertically while still having all the same error propagation behaviors. It's just that you don't have to annotate the propagation as aggressively as we have to today. And at the same time, you know that it will only propagate to your caller. So it's not going to unwind your whole call stack for you. There's no magic. It's just a simple return value. So, but I also see the argument for like the explicit question mark to denote that, okay, so this thing may actually throw something. I think there's definitely value in that. I'm just not sure which thing is more valuable, like being able to have this extremely expressive style, or being forced to mark potential error points. So it's an ongoing experiment to figure out what we actually want to do. Let's see. Victor says, yo, I was not even aware that you were working on a new language. That's amazing. And also funny how it has kind of the same north as what I'm working on. New semantics that transpiles to C in my case. Cool. Yeah, like I think transpiling is kind of an underrated approach, it seems like to me, because it really allows you to get going very, very quickly with something. And as long as you're building a sane data structure in your compiler, like there's nothing that prevents you from converting your transpiler into a regular native compiler that just lowers to IR and machine code down the line if you're happy with it. But like Transpilation seems like such an obvious way to get something going really quickly. Banka says, will Jakt have macros? If yes, will they be closer to those of C or those from Lisp? I have no idea. We'll find out. Godly Butcher says, can you make a video about the project, please? I don't follow on Twitter. Don't worry, I will make very many videos about this. Don't worry about that. Aaron says, will there be some Jakt hacking coding videos here soon? Yes, most likely. Sarfraz says, what didn't you like about Rust or Zig? I liked a lot of things about both languages, but Zig was a non-starter because it's not memory safe. And Rust was, well, we made an attempt to use Rust, but it was not, it was too frustrating to try to express graphical programs in Rust. So decided that it's not suitable for something like Serenity, which is primarily a desktop GUI system, since writing desktop GUI applications was prohibitively cumbersome. Paul Rath says, if you can optionally have semicolon at end of line, then I think Jakt will be a good step in the long run, especially while it transcode to C++, new platforms, and Arch. You can indeed have optional semicolons. Not exactly sure how to interpret this, but you can indeed. They are optional. Jesse says, so are we eventually going to ditch C++? I'm a bit out of the loop with this today, LOL. So at its core, this is still very much an experiment, or we should treat it as an experiment, right? It's just an experiment that I think is worth doing and doing seriously. So if this goes well, that means that we end up with a language that allows us to express all of the programs in Serenity and do so in a safer and more expressive way. And if we end up there, then that's great. And then we have no reason to use C++. But if it goes some other way, then we still have C++ and lots of other options to choose from. But at the moment, I'm just thinking, this is an experiment worth doing. And we're in a position where we can do stuff like this because we have complete vertical control of our system. So why not do it? That's my thinking. Stocknovst says, hi Andreas, how do you deal with distraction? How do you force yourself to focus? I work from home, toddler around me, and another on the way. I'm constantly distracted. My work is shallow. Even if I have 30 minutes uninterrupted, cannot focus. So I don't think I can honestly answer that in a good way because I never had to work with a toddler around, so I don't have experience with that particular setup. I imagine that a toddler can demand your attention at any moment and you have no choice but to give attention. That sounds difficult to deal with, but I guess I can say something that helps me a lot with distraction is that I've put myself in a space where there's nothing interesting around me to look at other than my computer. So I just have a boring wall in front of me, boring wall on the side, and just my teacup in front of me. And trying to create a boring environment is something that has worked really well for me. But I don't know, I feel like the fact that you have children and more coming makes me hesitant to even try to answer because I don't know what that is like. I'll have to talk to somebody. Like my brother has a bunch of kids. I need to ask him what he does, and then I can maybe have a proper thought about this. Linus says, how do you want to deal with decisions on which new language features to implement and how? The RFC process from other languages seems incredibly frustrating to me, often stretching over multiple years. So I think in Serenity and with Jakt, it's a lot easier in a way because we already have this huge code base that's essentially our benchmark for the language. And if you propose a new feature, if you come with a new feature and you say like, okay, well, look at this part of Serenity here. Here it is rewritten using my new feature, and look, isn't it much nicer this way? That sort of gives us, I think, it's like an obvious way to evaluate features. Like, do they make some part of Serenity much better or much nicer? If so, it might be a good feature, right? Whereas with other languages, I think it's harder to judge because you have to take millions of random programs into account, programs that are elsewhere or hypothetical programs and so on. We can at least like compare and contrast directly with our existing code base. So I think that will help a lot. And I don't think we need to have a formalized process, at least not at the moment. Perhaps that becomes necessary once the language stabilizes and calms down. But it's my intuition that as long as we are simply trying to sort of make Serenity itself the way that it is today, we try to make that easier and nicer to express in the new language. That will keep us busy for a while, and then we can figure out what comes after that. That's my intuition anyway. Abhishek says, is Jakt source code open source? Sure, it's right here. I assume that you mean Jakt. I will link it in the chat. Rodrigo says, well, hello friend from Brazil. Hello, Rodrigo. That's a nice golden yak you have there. Let's see. Ananta says, hello, Andreas. To be honest, rewriting to Jakt, it will be long. How do you handle that? I got time. I am a pretty patient person. Like very patient. I am willing to do really long tasks. Don't worry about that. Knut Bluetooth says, early Unix was written in assembler. Then they built C to have a portable language tailored to their needs in building Unix. It's fair to say it was a great success. I agree with that. Serenity having Jakt is similar. I guess you could say in a way it is similar, yeah. At least I hope it would become similar. I mean, it's still early, of course, to be able to say if it's a better language for implementing the system or not, but it is my hope that we will be able to make that. Let's see. Essalur says, Dear Andreas, there are many operating systems. As a device driver structure, which operating system's driver structure do you find flexible? You must have studied Apple, Windows, Linux. Well, I suppose I think Linux has a reasonably flexible driver structure. But I've never written a driver for any other system than Serenity and Linux, so I can't comment on Apple or Windows. But I did feel like making drivers for Linux was fairly straightforward. It's a bit of a hassle with how the probing works sometimes, but I don't know if I would think of any better way to do that. Rodrigo says, you update my Linux to 22.04 release. Yes, I did. I updated my Ubuntu to 22.04 and it broke a bunch of stuff, but now we're okay. Let's see, Vishnu is pasting some code. Let's paste it in here, take a look at it. So asking about this code and then saying, is D1 copied into D2 or is D2 holding a reference to D1? So arrays, or no, actually this is a dictionary, not an array. So at the moment, dictionaries have value semantics. So it's a copy. It's a copy of D1. And I'm not sure that that's actually the best. They should probably have reference semantics as well, because I don't think you want to copy dictionaries around as much as you want to just pass them around by reference. So our arrays that we have today, they are already, they have reference semantics. So if you make this guy right here, this thing, if you pass this to a function, then you're passing a reference to it. You're not passing a copy of it. So I think, yeah, we should change that so that dictionaries are passed by reference as well. Ireland says, will you add support for functional programming style to Jakt, like first class functions, etc.? Well, I don't know. we'll find out, I guess. If there's an argument to be made, like I was telling Linus just a few minutes ago, if there's an argument to be made that some part of Serenity would be much easier and or nicer to implement with a given feature, such as first class functions, then we should probably consider having that. But really, in my mind at least, the existing Serenity codebase is the best benchmark for whether or not something is a good feature or not. If it cleans up some part of Serenity, it might be a good feature. Tim Trikel says, do you have a strategy/philosophy in order to keep the operating system code small? Linux kernel is over 27 million lines of code, or is this not a concern in your eyes? Well, I mean, the best way to avoid becoming 27 million lines, I guess, is to only have a handful of drivers, and we are definitely succeeding in that area. But if you add thousands and thousands of drivers to a system, you kind of have to accept that your system is going to grow big. I think this, I know people like to dunk on Linux for being millions and millions of lines, but most of that is drivers. And if you think about what the options are, like making, okay, so you can make all those drivers live out of tree, and now they can go out of sync with, with the kernel data structures and stuff like that, and nobody's going to notice until somebody tries to build that random out of tree driver. And I think ultimately they're better off having that stuff in tree, so they have to kind of accept the growth. And there's probably a better way, but it's not obvious to me what the better way is. Anyway, we don't have a strategy for keeping the OS code small because we don't really have a huge kernel, at least not a huge kernel growth problem by any means. On the other hand, we definitely have a growing browser, and that's also, that's a kind of an interesting problem as well. Like, what do you do about the browser code that keeps growing because we're supporting more and more of the web platform? But, despite a popular belief, the web platform is actually finite. I know that you may not believe it, but there's actually an end to all the web APIs at some point, at least until Google pushes 10 new ones to Chrome. But there's a limit to how many things we need to support in the browser as well. But it is pretty boring when you touch a header in the browser and you have to rebuild thousands of files. I will say that. Anyways, I'm getting off track. Let me see. River was asking, do you watch George Hod's streams? I do not. I watched one George Hod's stream once, and I guess I didn't feel like watching any more of it after that, but nothing bad to say about it, just not really my energy. The literal definition of bruh says, since you work a lot on browsers, what would be some tips you would give to web developers to make their web page or code run as fast as possible in a browser, / be easy for the browser to optimize? Well, I guess my tip, both as a browser developer and as a browser user, would be to use less JavaScript and don't use 15 third-party tracking services and 25 ad brokers and all kinds of analytics and everything. When I load my local newspaper, they connect to like easily 100 third-party things for God knows what, and it's just silly when you see that type of stuff. And I shouldn't have to download 40 megabytes or whatever to read the front page of the local newspaper. And I know that everybody watching this already knows this, but that's definitely my tip. Like, you don't need a million tracking services. You don't need to do everything with third-party stuff. And of course, this decision is never up to the person writing the code. It's always up to to somebody who's paying you. But it's definitely the thing that's like, okay, let's say it this way. Like, the single most powerful thing you can do to improve your browser performance today is to use an ad blocker, right? Like, if you double the capacity of your machine, like you put in like the biggest processor and the biggest amount of RAM and like the fastest everything, that does not even compare to the impact of using an ad blocker. And that's pretty silly. Yeah, I'll just say that much. That's pretty silly. Let's see. Ooh, Victor joining the Yak herd. Thank you very much for the support. Victor said, on this topic of being very patient, how does one build mental fortitude to that? It's something that I've always struggled with personal projects. Oh, well, that's a good question. Like, how do you build a mental fortitude? I think what has worked for me, at least, is learning to take a very, very long-term perspective on things that I want to do. I used to always think in very short bursts of time ahead of myself. So I would think, what am I going to do today? Or what am I going to do this weekend, maybe? But starting with the Serenity project, and really starting before the Serenity project, when I went to rehab, I learned to look at life with a much, much longer time perspective. We talked a lot in rehab about what do you want to do with your life in 10 years or 30 years, or how do you want your life to be like when you're 80? And I feel like once I started looking at my life on this long-term perspective, my short-term thinking kind of, I don't know, I guess it became less, my thinking became less short-term, and I started incorporating more long-term thinking in my daily routine. And when I started the Serenity project, I was thinking already in the beginning that, okay, so this is something that's going to take me many years to do, and I'm okay with that because this looks really fun. This is something that I want to be doing for the next decade or 2 decades or 3 decades, whatever. And I didn't make myself any illusions about like, oh, this is going to give some instant reward, like this is going to be awesome in a week. I was fully aware that this is going to take a very long time to do. And because I went into it with that awareness, I think it tempered my expectations so much that, I would have given up much, much earlier as my younger self, because I never thought that far ahead. I've definitely started projects that were ambitious, sort of like Serenity, but they never went anywhere because I never took that long-term perspective. And I think that's probably one of the big things you can do to improve your mental fortitude, is to try to think longer term with your personal projects. Like, where do you want it to go? And like, how long do you want to be working on this? Do you want to be doing this 10 years from now? And chances are that the answer is yes, right? Because you probably love your personal project. And if you can design a personal project that you still want to be doing in 10 years, and you start to take that perspective, like, okay, so I'm going to do this for 10 years. Let's slow down and enjoy it. It's a bit like, I forget where it's from. It's from The Office, I think, maybe, where somebody says that that I wish that you knew that you were in the good old days while the good old days are happening, instead of realizing that something was the good old days afterwards. But I find that if you take the long-term perspective on things, then you can have that cake while you're eating it. Like, you can realize, wait a minute, I'm in the good old days right now. and then you can enjoy that feeling throughout the whole process. That at least is my operating beliefs at the moment. Let's see. Oh man, lots of messages here. Hello. SonicFan535 says, can you customize the allocator used for heap allocating class types? You cannot currently customize the allocator used. That might be something that we want to do in the future, but I don't know. Perhaps. We'll probably want to do pluggable allocators in the future because there are some interesting security mechanisms that rely on separation of allocators. So I think we'll probably have some mechanism for that, but I have no idea what it's going to look like. Let's see. Mataz says jungle. Not sure what to make of that, but jungle indeed. SJS1 says, why are class members private by default instead of protected in Jakt? Well, I don't know. They just are. If you want them to be protected, you can mark them as protected. It seems to me that protected variables, at least in like the way that I've learned OOP, is that you want to encapsulate state in your superclass. So if subclasses need to mess around with protected members of their superclass, then that often indicates that there's something not right with your design. So I guess that's why they are private by default, just to, that's what you would typically have. And then protected becomes the unusual case that you have to be explicit about. In general, in Jakt, that's kind of my thinking is that the happy path or the path of least resistance should be the preferable path in all cases. So that's why error handling looks the way that it does, because this is sort of the path of least resistance. You get all the error propagation, but you don't have to do any of the hassle. And I think it's the same thing when you're declaring a class that, you know, if I have a subclass of this, we don't actually have, subclassing is not implemented yet, but I feel like it's natural that bar here wouldn't by default be able to poke around with X and foo. I don't know, this. So this will not work, for example. But if you did something like that, it could. Also, unimplemented keyword. Eventually. So many things to do. Yeah, I think that's the reason, because protected should be an unusual case rather than the typical case, and we make the typical case the default. Caleb says, could the reference counting be done at compile time, or would it be better off using the smart pointer types in cogen? So that's a good question. So there's actually a fair amount of reference counting can be statically determined at runtime, at compile time, but at the moment we're doing kind of the DOM approach and just using the smart pointers in our cogen. And so we're emitting ref putter or non-null ref putter into the generated code, but later on we'll definitely want to do optimizations once we get to the point where the language is stable and we can start worrying about performance. One important optimization I think will be just looking for situations where we can elide a reference count churn, basically. So like you notice that, oh, here's an operation where we increment and then decrement the ref count, despite already having like a guaranteed strong reference on that same object visible within the current scope. And then you can just like say, okay, well, we don't need to +1, -1 the ref count in that particular location. And then there are a bunch of optimizations like that that we need to figure out how to do. And I know that Swift does a lot of smart stuff for that. And I think there are other languages that do this as well. So there should be some prior art to catch up on and learn how it works. But at the moment, we're just doing the dumbest approach. Let's see. Abhishek says, hey man, Jakt looks pretty awesome. I remember you mentioning that you don't have much interest in programming language / compilers, etc. I'm so stoked to be finally tinkering around how you wrote it. Right, yeah. So until a few weeks ago, I definitely was not interested in making my own language or our own language. But I became so frustrated while looking for an existing language to replace C++ that I just couldn't find one that fit what we're trying to do with Serenity. So I had to become interested when JT asked if we should just do it. So I guess I have to thank JT for changing my mind about it. Let's see. Undefined was asking, is Rust going to be just a temporary thing and Jakt is going to be rewritten in itself? Yes, it will absolutely be rewritten in itself when it's capable enough, which will probably be pretty soon, but we'll see. That's definitely one of the first milestones that I'm looking forward to. See, Lawrence. Hey, Lawrence, how's it going? Lawrence was asking, why is Jakt written in Rust and not C++? Wouldn't it have been quicker to get going? What about building it with LLVM? I'm sure these have been covered before. Sorry, you're awesome. Thank you. Sure, you're awesome too, Lawrence. So it's written in Rust because I bootstrapped the compiler with my friend JT, who is comfortable with Rust and not comfortable at all with C++. So it was definitely the efficient way to get going together. If we had gone with C++, it would have been a much slower project. So it was good to, I'm absolutely not good at writing Rust, but I can do a serviceable job with it. So we compromised, and we had to compromise and choose a language that one was more comfortable with than the other, and we went with Rust. Building it with LLVM. So we're building it with C++ so that we can interop with our existing code base and replace stuff incrementally. Instead of, if we were to build it with LLVM, we would be generating binaries, but they would then not really be able to interface with existing C++ API quite as easily. That's mainly the reason. So maybe one day when we have a complete system written in the new language, we can use something like LLVM, or we can make our own native cogen. Who knows? Kook says, I didn't know you write Rust. Sure, I write many languages. I just don't talk about them if I'm not experienced enough to have a nuanced opinion. Disposal with the chicken sandwich. Disposal with the chicken sandwich? That's like, you folks and your nicknames, sometimes they are just amazing. Disposal with the chicken sandwich says, what was the motivation behind creating Jakt? So that is explained in my post. If you haven't read it, I'll link it again. But long story short, I was thinking into the future and wondering what we can do with Serenity to make it more future-proof and increase its longevity, I guess. And I found that given that there are a bunch of languages around nowadays that don't have memory safety issues, sticking with a language that has memory safety issues just felt like I don't know. I don't like having avoidable problems, I guess. I would prefer to debug problems that couldn't have been avoided with a different approach to programming or with a different language. So I think that was sort of the core of my motivation. Like, do I really want to be debugging use after free bugs in 10, 20, or 30 years? Not really. I would rather be doing something else. There's tons of fun programming to do, and debugging use after free bugs is not really fun. So I thought that's how I started looking at this. Like, how do we get rid of these bugs forever? What are the options? And then there was sort of a little journey of trying some of the existing languages and finding them insufficient for our needs, and then eventually settling on, well, we can just try to make something ourselves that fits our needs exactly. Anyways, it's I'm saying it much better in the post, so please read that. Let's see. Obina says, hello, Andreas. Hope your day is going well. What's the path to contributing to SerenityOS for Mac OS users? Ooh. Well, it's the same path as everybody else. We have somewhere in the repository, there's a Mac document right here. Yeah, build instructions macOS.md in documentation. And I have never tried to develop Serenity on macOS, so I don't know what it's like. I'm sure that it's slightly different in various annoying ways compared to Linux, but I know that many people have successfully worked on the system and made changes, contributed changes, so I'm sure you can do it too. This is where I would start. I'll link it in the chat. And you can come on Discord and ask if there's somebody else who's developing on Mac, and I'm sure they can tell you about how they've set things up. Omni says, your thoughts on Kaiser on Linux. Kaiser on Linux. Okay, let's find out what this is. Hiding the kernel from user space. Oh, it's just kernel page table isolation? Yeah, that seems like a reasonable thing to do. We should probably implement that, I think. So I guess the idea is that you want to prevent user space programs from doing these CPU speculation tricks in order to discover things about kernel address space. Like I have to read into the specifics about what it's about, but I remember listening to somebody talk about it. I don't know, 2 years ago, and it sounded like something we should do for Serenity, but then I also just forgot about doing it. But I'm sure that we could do something like that. Norberto says, what operating system are you using? I am currently on Ubuntu Mate. Hun Programmer says, will Jakt have referential semantics for objects by default? Yes. Yes, it has reference semantics for objects by default and value semantics for structs. So if you wanted to have a stack allocated something, you can make one of these instead. So if you create, if you instantiate a foo, this is on the heap because it's a class. So classes always go on the heap. Structs always go on the stack. So when you're passing a bar around, you're doing a copy rather than a pointer. You're passing this one around, you are passing around a pointer. Knut Bluetooth joining the Yak herd. Thank you, thank you very much for the support. It still makes me laugh every time I see the golden yak. It's such a goofy little icon. Oh man, I am falling behind as usual. Let's see. Dex is TTP. Oh, Dex, I saw your post on Hacker News. I wanted to tell you that so there was this post on Hacker News about Serenity, and Dex has made such a great comment that I really liked reading. Let's see if we were on here earlier today. Here we are. Yeah, so somebody was asking like, oh, but did they actually have memory safety issues? And then Dex here was like writing out 2 of their memory safety issues that they had run into in great detail. I really enjoyed that. So I'm just going to link that in the chat right here. But let me get back to what you were saying now. I was just very happy to see that. Is there any strategy now or in the future in Jakt to avoid cyclic references? Is it cyclic or cyclic? I'm going to say cyclic references. So having A pointer to B and B pointer to A, ending with both classes effectively leaking. Right, so that's the classic reference cycle problem. And the strategy to avoid that is that one of the pointers should be weak, right? So you, in Jakt, what you would say that we have, I mean, let's have foo and bar point at each other. So we would have something like this. Wait, I'm not doing this right at all. It should be like this. So both of these would be strong references or strong pointers. So they will effectively leak because they keep each other alive if you instantiate these 2. So the strategy here is to make one of them weak, and you decide which one you want, but one of them has to be weak, and that then prevents the cycle, because weak means that it does not manipulate the reference count of the pointee. And when the pointee is destroyed, this weak thing actually becomes empty or null, if you will. So it actually needs the question mark, which means optional. That's the strategy, and it's the same exact strategy used by the Swift language. So we are just stealing that, basically. And we definitely want to add some kind of debugging tool for this. And a typical one that I've seen in other systems is that when the program exits, you can, like in debug mode or whatever, you can have like a little scan that just looks through objects and looks for reference cycles. And then when you exit the program, you print out like, okay, so these 2 objects are pointing at each other strongly. And that will hopefully allow you to find these issues. But not sure how that tool will work yet, but I'm sure we can come up with something. Not a channel says, what's the async story in Jakt? There is no async story yet. Evine says, what languages did you evaluate to replace C++? It seems Swift is perhaps the closest match to Jakt. Swift was indeed one of the languages that I looked at and learned. I looked at a whole bunch of them. I don't necessarily want to, I don't want to sit here and complain about what's good and what's bad about languages, because I haven't spent, I haven't spent enough time to allow myself to crap on anything. I only crap on things that I love. And but I looked at a bunch of them, and my conclusion was that instead of like buying a wholesale solution from somebody else where we have to accept all of the idiosyncratic dependencies and warts and weird little things that they require us to do, instead of doing that, we can just steal all their nice features and make our own thing that doesn't force us to do anything we don't want to do. Let's see. Thomas Q says, how sure are you that Jakt is going to be a default in the project and not something that gets scrapped in a couple of months? Asking because I don't think it would be very productive to rewrite something twice. Well, I guess you'll just have to wait and see what happens. Pattymate says, are there constructors in Jakt? Yes, but the syntax for declaring constructors is still in need of love. So at the moment, we kind of generate the constructors for you. And this is something that needs more love. We need to allow more types of construction. But if you have an object that looks like this, for example, it gets an automatically generated constructor that you can invoke like that. Also, I love these little argument labels, by the way. This is one of my favorite things about the language so far, because they are so sweet when you have booleans, right? If you have something like cool bool, rad bool, and what's another great word from the 90s? So instead of saying like true, true, and true, you now have to say cool true, rad true, and awesome true. And this is something that has been a constant source of frustration, I feel like, with C++, that you don't really want to have the trailing true, 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 or false, false, false. And this just looks so much nicer. Let's see. Tim says, if I want to prevent use after free errors in C, do I need to use getter setter methods that check if the memory is valid? If you want to prevent use after free errors in C, then you need to stop using things after freeing them. C is an extremely manual language, so there isn't a programming pattern that's really going to save you from yourself. You just simply have to stop using your memory after free. And there are tools to help you catch use after frees, like Valgrind is a classic. If you're not familiar with Valgrind, that is definitely the place to start. Get it, learn it, love it. It's a great tool. Let's see. Abraham says, hi, Dev. I want you to say my name one time. Well, I guess I just did. Satusin says, hi, Andreas and everyone watching. Just catching up on all this Jakt news. Really interesting stuff. Love that JT has been helping out. They are awesome. Have a great weekend, everyone. Indeed, JT is awesome. I love me some JT. Definitely recommend checking out JT's YouTube channel if you are not already subscribed. Let me find it. Da, 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 da. Definitely recommend subbing to JT, and I don't want to promise anything, but it seems possible that there might be some Jakt content happening over here sometime. Who knows? Let's see. Setisin says, yes, Jakt looks to be inspired by Swift, which is great, as I feel Swift doesn't get the love it truly deserves just because it's from Apple. Yeah, that was also my impression while looking at Swift recently, was that this is a pretty cool language. Like, why people are really sleeping on it, it seemed like to me. Kind of dismissive, just as you say, because it's from Apple. Also with Jakt hitting Hacker News, you know, in a few weeks, there's going to be some recruiter firing out job specs with required 2 years professional Jakt experience. Oh yeah, that always happens. Guess we'll just have to wait to see when the first one comes in. Celia says, hey, this language looks fun already. Do you think you will support super low level code in it? You said that arrays are allocated on the heap, but then how to implement a heap in it. So at the moment, we don't support like stack arrays, if you want to call them that. So there are some very low level things that you can't easily express, but probably we will add syntax for that later on. At the moment, we are focusing on the sort of the user space programming environment, trying to come up with the best user space systems language for user space programs, because that is what we do mostly. But I think with a few more steps, we can also enable most or maybe even all of the kernel stuff to also be in Jakt, but it will require some more low-level features, like, as you say, like arrays, for example, like not dynamic arrays, but value arrays or flat arrays, or whatever you want to call them. That is a thing that we need. Dun -dun. Crystal Rope says, could the order of arguments be changed with the labels? At the moment, no. You still have to pass them in the order that they are declared. You cannot change the order. And there's a boring reason for that, but I think that's I think I would rather force you to, wait, did I even change anything there? You cannot change the order. It will not compile, but I think that's probably a good thing, because I wouldn't want to have like the arguments in random order in random places. One thing that I like, which is really nice, is that if you have a variable in the same scope here, so if I have a variable named cool, I don't have to do this. If I want to pass it, I can also just say cool. We accept. You can skip the argument label if you're passing a variable with the same name as the label. Hey, look, it's JT. How's it going? Good morning. That is pretty early, isn't it? I have to look at my world clock here to see that it is 4 a.m. Holy moly! All right, well, hello. I was just telling people to subscribe to you on YouTube. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, Sam was asking the same thing. Yeah, right. Satusun says, I noticed that you're going with automatic reference counting in Jakt, which is very cool. I love that Serenity embraces things it seems only Apple does. I recall you talking about purgeable memory a while back, and just thinking, why don't other platforms do it too? Yeah, I think it's a bit strange, but like Apple has a lot of nice ideas, and some of them are just things that we can just take and do ourselves. And I don't know why it really does seem like the Linux community, if you want to call it that, is like a little bit allergic to anything that comes out of Apple, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. And I don't feel bad about using cool ideas just because they're from Apple. Anyway, Kook was saying that I missed a question above. All right, let's scroll back until we see Kook. Kook says, wait, I guess it's here. Is Jakt supposed to replace C++ in Serenity 2? That is the experiment. The experiment is to find out if we can replace it with something better. In Serenity, yes. And then they say something about Zig would be the perfect language to replace C++. Zig is lacking a lot of features and is not a suitable C++ replacement for anybody who's writing serious C++. Like it would be a very large regression in feature set. So it's not really a suitable replacement for us. And then I'm just trying to figure out which thing was the missed question from Kook. Kook was saying, then again, I can see why you might prefer writing your own language. It goes back to the we write everything ourselves mentality. That way you can tailor Jakt to Serenity's needs. Yes, that is exactly right. I mean, it shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody that Serenity decides to have its own language, because we have our own everything else, right? Like if you said this, if any other project said we're making a language for our project, then it would be understandable to be skeptical. But Serenity, it's, you know, we make everything ourselves. So what's one more thing? Okay, so now I'm catching up. Let's see. So Kook was saying, so writing the parameter names is required. Can you make it so that if you pass a variable and the variable name is the same as the parameter name, you don't need to write the parameter name? Yes, that is already the case. Not a channel says, won't Apple hit you with patent infringement if you take their ideas? Well, not all ideas are covered by patents. The ones that are, of course, you have to be careful. Let's see. Darius says, what do you think about Jakt being used for other stuff than for SerenityOS? Will that just be a side effect or also considered when adding features? That's definitely in the side effect department, at least right now. I'm really mainly interested in the Serenity use case for the time being. So perhaps in the future, if somebody finds something else to use it for, we will take their needs into account as well, depending on what they want to do. But at the moment, Serenity is sort of the big customer, and we're going to be tailoring it to the needs of Serenity. NH Orus says, will you resume coding videos? They are very soothing and interesting. Yes, I will absolutely resume video making now that I am out of the I don't know what to call it, out of the secret phase and out in the open. Let's see. Ananta says, will Jakt support linking with assembly code or inline assembly code? And how about performance for GC? It will have delay for OS. Huh? You can absolutely link with assembly code today if you put it in a separate compilation unit. There is no garbage collector in Jakt, so I don't know what that is in reference to. There is no inline assembly keyword, but we do have inline C++. I will say that. That is something that we have, and I haven't tried it myself yet, but I know Linus added it. I think it goes like this. And then in theory, you should be able to do anything here. So let's, wait, how do you even do this? Let me make a variable. Let's see if I'm using it right. Use of inline CPP block outside of unsafe block. Okay, so it has to be unsafe. Cool. Ah, it worked. And yeah, actually, as Sam says, you can totally put inline assembly in there, I guess. So if you want it to be a total madman, maybe you could do something like this. Wait, how do I put a quote here, though? Can I do this? Like, I will try to turn off interrupts in my program. I don't know if that will compile. Oh, it seems like it might. Oh, wait. Oh, this is so weird. And it's like false because you can't do CLI in user mode. That's really cool. Right, so you can actually put inline assembly in there already. You just have to make an unsafe block and then make an inline C++ block and then put your inline assembly there. Crazy. I really hope that we don't see much code looking like this. Let's see, Roland says, I guess the embedded CPP will be super brittle in regards to the compiler implementation changing. Sure, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a little brittle, but as long as we can make guarantees about symbol names, then it should be, and like variable names, then it should be reasonable to do some inline C++ stuff. But I think, I don't foresee this feature being like aggressively used. I think this is something that we will use as an escape hatch when there's some little thing that we want to do that would require a lot of work on the language. And then it's like it's easier to just patch in like 2 lines of inline C++ to avoid writing 300 lines of compiler code. That's sort of what I expect, but we'll see what happens with that. Let's see. Ananta says automatic reference counting is different with GC. Yes, automatic reference counting is not the same as garbage collection. TrialPod says, wouldn't stating the CPP scope be enough to determine if it's CPP or not? Well, so just, I guess we just decided that CPP is only allowed in unsafe contexts. So just to make it extra clear, whenever you, like, we want it to be so that whenever you're looking at unsafe code, it should be obvious from context. So we say we have to have an unsafe keyword whenever you're going to do anything unsafe. And CPP blocks are clearly inherently unsafe. And we're not afraid to like write things out here. I guess maybe you could come up with something like this. I don't know that, but I don't think this is so common that it's worth trying to optimize to avoid right word drift in this case, because I don't want to see this often. Anyway, this should be exceedingly rare. Roland says, you probably need some sane way to import variables into the context of an inline C++, similar to inline assembly. Right. Yeah, exactly. You can't, once we start supporting stuff like shadowing and rebinding, we're going to have to generate variable names. So we'll need some kind of syntax for, I guess you can think of it as like capturing variable names. Or something like that. So I don't know what you would have. You would some syntax. I don't know. And then A would be available in here. Maybe the capture syntax like in C++ actually. Who knows? But that's not a thing at the moment. However, this feature is a thing at the moment. Not a channel says, if it's suspicious code, it makes sense to make it look ugly. Yes, exactly. We want anything that's suspicious should look as ugly and suspicious as possible. And this definitely looks ugly and suspicious. Let's see. Kook said, if it's mutable instead of mute, does that mean in Jakt words in their full form are preferred over abbreviations? Yes, exactly. We use full form words for everything to give the language that really readable feeling. Swirl Studios says, did you see the discussion in Discord around Lobster? It uses arc, but then also does static analysis to remove as many refs and derefs as it can at compile time. Interesting middle ground. Yes, I did see that. I did read their document. That sounds like a perfectly reasonable optimization to work on, and something that keeps coming up. It's like one of those things that we're going to look at once the language is more mature. Then I mean, it's essentially talking about ref count elision and strategies for finding opportunities to avoid mutating the ref count. And I think that's definitely something that we want to pursue. Let's see, Caleb says, can you mutate immutable values in a CPP block? So the problem with trying to do that is that the variable that we generate in C++ will still be const. Wait, what? Expected block of string. Oh, shoot. I have to make a string. This syntax is really weird, by the way. But I understand why it's like that, but still. There we go. Yeah, so cannot assign to variable A with const qualified type const I64. So the code that we generate for let makes a const variable, as you can see here. So even if you try to mutate it in your inline CPP block, it won't work. It has to be mutable. Silent Bobby says, do you have a language server for your language? Can you go to implementation or use autocomplete? Not yet. Not yet. But that's definitely something that we will need to bring up as well. Obviously, we want to have all of the IDE features available for the language to make it easier to work with. TrueKS says, but how does that theoretically stop you from using that syntax? It doesn't. That's the thing. It doesn't stop you from using the syntax. Because we are not going to do any kind of semantic analysis on the C++ that you give us here. We'll just spit it out in the transpilation process and trust you to know what you're doing. That's kind of how the inline CPP works. It's definitely not within the scope of the project to build a C++ interpreter into it. Anyway, Thomas says, will the eventual auto formatter be aligning the colons in function arguments like was Objective-C convention? Well, the auto formatter will do something. I can't tell you exactly what it will do, but once we make it, it will decide the style for you, and then we can just use that everywhere and make sure that everybody has the same style. Think we'll just go with something consistent in the beginning so that we don't have to have like different competing styles. Okay, so I know that more and more question keeps coming, but I actually have to go because it's 6 p.m. So don't worry, we'll be back again next week, and probably with a lot more things to show you about the language. So I want to thank everybody for coming to office hours. I really appreciate it. It's so good to be back, and it's so good to finally like publish what I was working on. I don't like working in secret. I just felt like it was necessary with this thing. I really appreciate all the energy and excitement, and I super excited about this project, and I think it's going to be very, very interesting. Whatever happens with it, we're going to learn a lot from this. And thanks everybody for joining the yak herd as well and posting with your golden yaks. And I'll see you soon in a video or in the next stream. So bye-bye.